Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charlotte Williams. I am an Associate Professor of Leadership at the Clinton School of Public Service, Director of the Center on Community Philanthropy. I want to welcome you to our public program. You are in for a treat. You have an amazing speaker this week, John A. Powell. Professor Powell has been with us for an entire week at the Clinton School. He has been our scholar in residence in the area of race and equity. We also just culminated our day-and-a-half summit, exploring issues of race, racialized space, and how to create the opportunities that we want for our communities, our neighborhoods, and for the region. We had a very nice mix of expert researchers from across the country presenting on this topic. And so this morning's or this afternoon's speech symbolizes the culmination of the summit. Our morning speaker is Professor John A. Powell. He's the Executive Director of the Haas Center for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of California at Berkeley. Prior to that, Professor Powell was the Director of the Kieran Institute on Race and Ethnicity at Ohio. Prior to that, he started the Institute on Race and Ethnicity at Minnesota. Professor Powell did his undergraduate work at Stanford University, and then he did his graduate work at Yale and at Berkeley University. He is one of the most nationally and internationally recognized researchers, experts, consultants. He's highly published in this area of looking at race and its impact on social determinants, of how environments impact our overall process of life. He has an amazing body of work that focuses on unconscious bias and the role of the unconscious mind in processing how we interact with each other around the lines of race. So without further ado, I introduce to you our public program speaker, Professor John Powell.
So before we get into the program, I want all of you to join me in congratulating. We're just coming through the scan, and we got the news that Dr. Charlotte Williams has been granted tenure here at the Clinton School. So join me in and for those of you who are not in academia, that's a big deal. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about a couple of things. I'm going to talk about targeted universalism, and I may have to turn around to see the screen, but targeted universalism and how it relates to something I call the circle of human concern. So first of all, what I have to do is introduce you to the concept of targeted universalism. So universalism is something that actually appeals to us in our society because we want to be fair, we want to be inclusive, we want to be universal, we want to make sure everyone has a seat at the table. Unfortunately, universalism, as we apply it, doesn't actually work. And it doesn't work because people are situated differently and for a whole bunch of reasons. So we have a universal plan, and you know, somebody gets left out. So then our response oftentimes is like, okay, so we can't be universal. Let's be targeted. Let's make sure we focus on a particular marginalized population. And that can be people with disabilities, that can be African Americans, that can be Latinos, that can be people who are over 65 or people who don't have hair on the top of their head. They're in different situations will actually advantage or disadvantage us so that many of us as we move through life will actually have some experience of being marginalized. I actually gave a lecture a year or so ago to this august group, and it was a wonderful group. I enjoyed it very much, and it was a couple of hundred people, and there were maybe half a dozen African Americans there, 2 or 3 Latinos, but the people that I was drawn to in that venue were people over 40, because most of the people were under 30, and it created a different kind of group dynamics. So I wanted to someone who had similar experience to me, but it wasn't at a conscious level. So sometimes we focus on targeted groups. We focus very targeted on groups who are marginalized because of any number of things. The problem with that is that sometimes that creates a sense of divisiveness. Why are you working on African American men and not African American women? Why are you working on Latinos and not whites? Why are you working on the elderly and not the young? So there's a sense of being left out. So targeted programs don't work because it ignores the fact that people are situated differently. Universal programs, I mean, targeted programs doesn't work because it oftentimes creates a sense of divisiveness. And so we're sort of stuck. Universal programs tend not to work. Targeted programs tend not to work. So what do we need to do? And what I suggest we need to do is move towards something called targeted universalism. So how is that different? What do I mean by targeted universalism? The idea is that we have universal goals. We all want our children to grow up and have healthy lives. We all want our children to have a decent education. We all want our children and our family to have a safe environment. There may be some disagreements at the edges, but for the vast majority of things, we all want the same thing for our family, for our friends, for the people we care about. Those goals are universal. And that's what we should be universal in our goals. We should have a discussion. We should talk about the things that we all want. But we are situated in different places. So how do we get to healthy community? How do we get to healthy children? How do we get to a place? So let's say I'm trying to get to DC. You're trying to get to DC too. We're all trying to get to DC. But I have a bicycle, you have a car, my friend has a jet. We have different pathways to get there. And if we're trying to facilitate a process that will get us there, we will have to have different strategies. So the strategies will be targeted. The strategies for bicyclists will be different than the strategy for someone with a car. The strategy for someone with a car will be different than the strategy for someone with the airplane. It's not because the people are fundamentally different themselves, but it's because they're situated differently within structures. And so we target them based on their situatedness. But the goal is exactly the same. We're trying to get everybody, in this case, to DC. So sometimes the confusion we make is we adopt universal strategies. We adopt the same strategy for every population. We are confused because we think, okay, I have a bicycle, so we need to make sure everybody has a bicycle path. Well, I don't need a bicycle path, I'm flying. So a bicycle path, in fact, I need a runway. A bicycle path doesn't help me. So we don't need universal strategies, we need universal goals and targeted strategies. And in terms of developing those targeted strategies, again, it becomes quite important to be clear on what we're doing. This is both a programmatic approach and a communication approach. It's programmatic because we adopt programs that are designed to help everyone get to that universal goal based on their situatedness. It's a communication strategy because it helps us talk about these things in a non-divisive way without ignoring the fact that we're situated differently. So if I say, I want to do something for black folks, people who are not black might say, well, you know, I don't know about that. What about people who aren't black? If I say I want to do something for women, people might say, wait a minute, what about men? Which is on one level a legitimate question. What we need to then go deeper in is how men might be situated differently than women, that might be differently situated from each group. So this is the concept of targeted universalism, and it's been used successfully, frankly, around the country several times, and help people who sometimes get stuck on issues of race, on issues of ethnicity, on issues of gender, and it sometimes allows people to get unstuck. And it does it in some important ways, and I want to tease out a couple. One way it does it is everybody shows up. We're trying to get everybody to DC. Not just the people on bicycles, not just people in cars, everybody. So whites, blacks, Latinos, men, everybody has a stake in the game. And then two, it also allows us to actually become granular and actually look at how people are differently situated. So we need to avoid what I call the false universalism. And the false universalism, again, universal sounds appealing. I treat everybody exactly the same. You know, you heard that old adage that we prohibit everybody from sleeping on the streets, the person who is homeless and the person who has a house. I was in Florida when they banned public urination and public sleeping. Well, it may sound like a reasonable thing, and they didn't say anything about some people can't urinate in public and some people can't. They said no one, this is a universal rule. Except if you're homeless, where are you supposed to go? If they say no sleeping in the streets, and all I have is the street, where am I supposed to sleep? So it sounds reasonable, but it turns out to be quite unreasonable because it's ignoring the fact that people are differently situated. So it becomes extremely important to pay attention to that. And as we pay attention to that, we notice that most structures, without being explicit, privilege some people over other people. So I'm looking at the back window there, there's an escalator going up. We're trying to get to the 3rd floor, that's the goal. We all want to get to the 3rd floor. We all want to get to the penthouse and see where the president hangs out when he comes in Little Rock. But the escalator does not help the guy in a wheelchair. If we ignore the fact that he has a different situation than those of us who can step on an escalator, we leave him out. We marginalize him. The people who build the escalator aren't necessarily thinking about how do I make sure people in wheelchairs never get to see President Clinton's penthouse. So it's not necessarily designed with any pernicious thought in mind, but the effect of it is these structures actually distribute opportunity to people in different ways, and we relate and are situated differently within these structures. So that's one of the lessons then to take from this, to be clear on how we're situated. And there's some interesting stuff that comes from this. I'll give you one example. When Romney was governor of Massachusetts, he, I think much to his embarrassment and chagrin right now, developed a health care plan. And the health care plan was called the Universal Health Care Plan, and I actually had a small hand in it. And people said, so what do you think of it? And I said, it's a problem. And they said, wait a minute, why is it a problem? And I said, so the purpose of this is to make sure everyone have adequate health care. But the strategy was to give everyone health care insurance. The effect of that was to actually create greater disparities between the white community and the Black and Latino community in terms of health care providers. And that may sound counterintuitive. And in fact, when I said that, and I did say that to some people, even as they were developing a plan, it was like, blacks and Latinos are least likely to have insurance. If we make insurance available to everyone, why wouldn't it close the gap, making blacks and Latinos the most highly beneficiaries of this plan? Well, the reason it worked that way is that, okay, you put health insurance in everybody's hand, but you really don't, the goal is not really for everybody to have health insurance. The goal is for everybody to have health care. And what it did, by increasing health care demand in the white community, it actually pulled doctors and health care providers from the Black and Latino community. So now they had a piece of paper, but they didn't have a place to use it. So you have to look at what's really going on. And they later went back and tried to correct that. So you have to be very clear about, again, universal strategies don't necessarily produce universal outcomes because we're situated differently. So the Black and Latino community were situated differently than, in this case, the white community in relationship to health care. So all of us has heard this old adage that a rising tide raise all boats. But of course we know when we think about it that some people don't have a boat. And in fact, a rising tide for them is just trouble. This is a real photograph from New Orleans. A rising tide does not lift a car. So if you're in a car and the tide is rising, try to find a friend with a boat. But this adage, which we use a lot, it sounds good because it invites us to believe that we can adopt a universal strategy and we will all benefit from it. Some of us don't have a car, some of us don't have a boat, some of us can swim, some of us can't swim. We are situated very differently in relationship to that rising tide. And so that adage ignores that and it invites us to a kind of false universalism. We have a hard time noticing how we're situated within structures and institutions because we're what one academic calls methodological individualists. We tend to see everything in terms of our personal agency instead of seeing that we are constantly interacting with our environment in very complex ways. And what we're suggesting is that we change this. So part of the way that we make sense of this is by telling stories. So when we see someone who is not doing well, who's not rising with the tide, do we notice that that person doesn't have a boat, or do we blame it on the person? And if you think, again, going back to New Orleans, we see really a very poignant example of this. It's not hypothetical, it was real. So we saw in New Orleans where they warned that the levees might break. Of course, actually they had given that warning several times. It was a little bit like Chicken Little. It's like, so some people may have felt like, well, yeah, I heard that warning last week and the week before last, and it never happened. But more importantly, once it became clear that this warning was real, that this hurricane was actually going to hit, was going to New Orleans, we adopted a universal strategy, not goal, universal strategy to achieve what we thought was an appropriate goal. The goal was to get everybody out of harm's way, to get them out of New Orleans. Well, how are we going to do that? We want you to get in your car and drive. And then the hurricane hit, the levees fell, and we saw hundreds and hundreds of black people in New Orleans stranded on top of roofs as this hurricane as the water was rising. And then there was a story. How do you make sense of that? How do you make sense? And I actually wrote a chapter in a book about a natural disaster. This is a natural disaster. Some people would say it's an act of God. This is colorblind at its extreme. This has nothing to do with race. So why are all those black people stranded? And for the first couple of days, the media was really confused because they kept saying, we know you see all these black people stranded, but this has nothing to do with race. And it reminds me of a famous American philosopher. Some of you may know him. His name is Richard Pryor. And he tells a story about his wife. She has the gall to come home early from work without calling. And she walks in the bedroom, and he's in bed with another woman. And he says, before you say anything, I just have one question for you. Do you believe me or your lying eyes? So we were in that situation where the pundits were saying, do you believe us or your lying eyes? We know there are a lot of black people stranded, but we're trying to tell you this has nothing to do with race. Eventually they changed their story. And the story is, well, maybe this does have something to do with race, because New Orleans is not all black, and certainly the New Orleans region is not all black. So why were the vast majority of people stranded in New Orleans black? And then the story started spinning. And one story was those trifling black people We told them that the levees was going to break. We told them the hurricane was going to hit, and they refused to leave. And now they're stranded, and they want us to rescue them. That was a story that a lot of people told. There was another story that eventually came out, and it was 35% of the black people in New Orleans don't have cars. And so the strategy of evacuating by the use of private vehicles didn't make sense. It didn't acknowledge the fact that people had a different situatedness in relationship to cars. And so that story got out too. But when we see these disparities, when we see these racial, gender, age difference, we immediately have a story that we adopt in trying to make sense of that. And many of these stories actually appeal to the unconscious. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the unconscious. I'm going to show you a couple of videos. Some of you may have seen that before. I'm asking the tech person to come up and help me because we had some trouble loading these videos. Most of our cognitive and emotional processing goes on unconsciously. And that's something that's hard for most people to be comfortable with. Most people believe, I really know what I think, I know what I feel. And it turns out to be not true. Most of our processing goes on behind our back. In fact, scientists say that we process about 2 million bits of information a second, and we can only be conscious of 40. Which means that there's a lot going on that impacts us, that affects us, that we're not consciously aware of. And you might say, well, if it's unconscious, how do we know it's going on? We can measure it. You know, the example I give is that if I want to know how much someone weighs, I don't ask them. I have them step on a scale. Because most of us don't know, and many of us who do know wouldn't tell. So it's just step on the scale. We'll let the scale tell us how much we weigh. So that's what we do with a lot of the work around unconscious bias. Now, one of the things in terms of unconscious bias is that we can actually prime people so that one aspect focuses on something different than another. So what do I mean by that? If you can only focus on 40, which of the 40 will you focus on? We can do things so you focus on one thing and not another thing. We call that priming. We are primed all the time. We're primed around race, we're primed around gender, we're primed around age, we're primed around language, so that we notice some things and we don't notice some things.
Is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
So I take it by your laughter that you were appropriately primed and you didn't see the bear. That's happening all the time. What we see, the meaning we attach, we're primed. We can only process 40 bits of information a second, and we're consciously, and yet we're processing 2 million. So unconsciously, you actually did notice the bear, and it actually affected you, and we can show that as well. But consciously, many of you didn't see the bear. And again, so what we see, we're constantly selecting, and it's being suggested to us. You will see this, and you won't see that. You'll notice this, and you won't notice that. This has this meaning. And this is actually quite important. This is a diagram, and in this diagram, generated by Susan Fisk, she has what she calls an axis of warmth, another axis for competency. If you think someone is competent, and warm, you like them. Those become the most favorite group in society. And people move on this chart. Groups move on this chart. So when you're in this area here, that is, people don't like you, and they don't think you're very competent. What happens when you fall into this category, you actually find that the part of the brain that lights up when you see a human being doesn't light up. So, and that's at an unconscious level. When we think someone is not competent, we don't like them, at some point they get kicked out of the circle of human concern. They cease to be human. And once they cease to be human, we will not make any public policy to support them. Different things, how does a group become human or not human? Partially it's by the stories we tell, by how people are primed. And so when we talked about New Orleans, we were ready to believe, some large segment of society was ready to believe that African Americans didn't leave because they're trifling. They were primed, there were stories all over television about trifling African Americans, and these repetitious stories was priming us. We didn't know the people there, many of us didn't know the people there personally, but we had a story, we had to make sense of the world, and stories help us make sense of the world. So you've all heard that if you have a criminal record, it's hard to get a job, and it's true. So here's an example, seeing how likely you are to get a job if you have a criminal record and you're white. Obviously, it has a huge impact in terms of it reduces your chances of getting a job if you have a criminal record and you don't have a criminal record. But if you're black, it turns out that even without a criminal record, you're less likely to be hired than a white person with a criminal record. Same qualifications. How do we make sense of that? Again, a lot of that's because of how the stories we tell about blacks. So it's not just criminal record. Yes, crime actually plays a role in how we look at people. But even beyond crime, we're also looking at the person's race. And there's a story that's told about the worthiness of this person and whether or not he or she should be hired. So I have another video if I can get some help. And I should say, I'm not suggesting that, again, that we all do this all the time. What I'm suggesting is that this is part of our national ethos, that we're sending messages, that we're putting people outside of the circle of human concern. There's recent research showing that for young black men, there's a very high association, not with humanness, but with gorillas. And there's a high correlation that once you make that association that these young men are not people at an unconscious level, then they're subjected to violence, they're subjected to arrest, they're subjected to all kinds of things. So in some ways it's interesting to think about now tying these two things together, the strategy of targeting universalism and the circle of human concern. Okay, and I was talking to Dr. Williams about this earlier. So when people read that, even the first thing, they assume, maybe rightly, wrongly, or understandably, not rightly, that the picture is the picture of the guy or the person who we're talking about in terms of robbery, apprehended, instead of the policeman. There's another slide that I had that didn't get into the PowerPoint, where there's a picture of a face smiling. And the face is actually, they have two faces, one's white and one's black. The faces are structurally the same, but one is black and one's white. Most Americans don't see the black face smiling until much later than they see the white's face smiling. Because in our society, we tell stories about angry black men or dangerous black men, so it's hard for them to see physically that the face might actually be smiling. So, and we live within these structures. These structures distribute opportunity, and these structures are both at the individual level, community level, and they determine life chances. So there are two really serious things for us to think about. When we have sustained inequality, when we have sustained disparities, it might tell us to look more carefully at what's going on. Why is it that blacks are not leaving New Orleans? Why is it that blacks are disproportionately stranded? Why is it that there's something called durable inequality in the black community? One way of understanding that is to blame black people for it. Another is to look more carefully and see if there are also structures. Even when we have universal programs, it's important to see if, in fact, those universal programs are sensitive to our situatedness. And it's not enough for us to have universal strategies. We have to make sure that the strategies are targeted based on our situatedness. We have to pay close attention to how structures are arranged, how institutions are arranged. Not one institution, not two institutions, but the interaction of institutions. So we have to look at these things together, and we're not skilled at doing that. We haven't been taught to do that. And so it's hard for us to pay attention in this way. And it's easy for us to fall back onto either a racial or gender trope. A more positive way of thinking about this is that our lives are enhanced or not by opportunities. We live and die within opportunity structures. And those structures are uneven. We look at our school districts, we look at how we do taxes, we look at how some neighborhoods have bad air. You can actually predict someone's life expectancy not simply by their personal behavior, but by their zip code. We're arranging opportunity based on zip code. But what's the story that we tell when we see that blacks have a shorter lifespan than whites? So here are some data. You'll know this data as well. The poverty rate between blacks and whites, the wealth rate between blacks and whites. How did that happen? What's the story that we tell about that? Again, if we push a group outside of the circle of humanity, we will not adopt policies to actually enhance that group. In fact, we're more likely to adopt policies to actually punish that group, to reflect unconscious despising of that group. So a couple of things, and then I'm going to end and open up for questions if there's time. The circle of humanity is actually a very interesting concept. At some point, if we keep putting people outside of the circle of humanity, the circle collapses. It ceases to function. What do we mean by that? What happens? What does it look like when the circle collapses? Robert Putnam talked about this in part. He talked about something he called general reciprocity. He said a society can only function when people have a general background concern for each other. And he distinguished between what he calls general reciprocity and specific reciprocity. So specific reciprocity is, I do something for you, and then it's like I wait for you to do something back for me. But general reciprocity is, I do something, and it's like paying it forward. You know, I do something, and I'm not expecting an immediate payback. We might also call it being courteous. If those of us who grew up in a Christian faith, we might call it being our brothers and sisters' keeper. We do something for someone, not expecting payback, and then at some point, someone do something for us. This concept of belongingness to each other is a profound concept. And when we belong, we have not only a sense of well-being, we actually participate in creating the structures that we live in. We participate in creating the stories. We participate in creating the rules. That's what belonging means. That's what full membership means. That I get to participate in creating this world that we collectively live in. Whereas when someone doesn't belong, they don't get to participate. Not only in a formal sense, where they may not be able to vote, but in an informal sense. They may have a voice, but they can't be heard. They can't break through. We can't see them. They're not really human. And we don't empathize with them. And when we continue to do that, at some point, the circle collapses. When the circle collapses, it doesn't benefit any of us. So a collapsed circle is a circle where we won't invest in public schools because we don't like who's in the public. We won't invest in hospitals. We won't invest in roads. We won't invest in infrastructure. We won't invest in ourselves. And the economy and the political system collapses. So Jeffrey Sachs, who's an economist at Columbia, a moderate economist, was head of the Millennium Foundation at the UN. He worries out loud in a new book called The Price of Civilization that we are in a space where our civilization may be about to collapse. When it collapses, it doesn't just hurt black people or Latinos or Asians or Native Americans. It actually hurts us all. Society can't function then. And so when we don't pay attention to the circle of human concern, that we're connected, that there's something not just spiritual, there's something political, there's something practical about being our brothers and sisters' keeper. It makes society work well or not. So Jeffrey Sachs, an economist, not a Christian minister, is worried that that's where we're headed as society. The other extreme is, can we invite everybody in? I met with some students here at the Clinton School yesterday, and one of the students asked, can we be inclusive without demonizing anybody? Do we have to have a villain in a story? And there's strong evidence that we can actually construct a story where we don't need to have a villain. It's not easy, but we can do it. And so what happens when you have a society where everybody's included? Well, two things, and then I'll conclude. Some people believe that the thing that made the United States the powerhouse in the 20th century was that it was the first major country in the world that invited women into public education and expanded the role of women in the circle of human concern. Before then, the women were largely consigned to private space. They weren't allowed to become doctors and lawyers. They weren't allowed to take up space that was the man's space. Literally, women could not work in many public institutions or private institutions for that matter. That started changing in the 1920s, beginning of the night. And all of a sudden, we're playing with close to a full deck. Instead of just focusing on men, we're focusing on men and women. It wasn't an easy process, and it's not a process that's complete even today. And some people saw it as, well, women are taking men's jobs. Instead of women are creating new jobs, new wealth, a new structure in society that caused the United States to explode in terms of growth, in terms of viability. Today, half the children born in the United States are not white. The 21st century equivalent of women are people of color. And if we do not invest in them, schools, hospitals, playgrounds to play in, we're not investing in the United States. And the vibrancy that defined the United States in the 20th century will not belong to us. It will belong to whatever society is most affected in terms of expanding the circle of human concern. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the floor? Senator Elliott.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here. I really got a lot out of what you had to say, a lot of thinking. But I also want to thank you for giving me a word to describe, to give me a word, That's what they do to politicians. That's what they do to shut us up. But I am the executive director for the Central Little Rock Promise neighborhood. And what we are trying to do has to do with that targeted universalism. But I didn't know that was a word, so that's what I want to thank you for giving me a word, because it was about finding all of the things that any family wants for their child, their family, but then have a differentiated way of getting there. So it'd be great to share. My question, though, surrounds getting there and understanding that in the work I'm doing, for instance, I can't get it done without bringing in everybody. One of the things I struggle with all the time is the folks who will say, well, do they live in the neighborhood? They're not us. They're not like us, so they don't need to be talking to us. And I'm saying, yes, they do, all part of the same big family here. And then on the other hand, there is the issue of, this is not my problem. I live in, say, West Little Rock or whatever. But one of the things I have found is that when I talk to people in small groups or one-on-one or whatever, I am amazed at the number of people that when you take the time to let them make mistakes, to even, as we say, and I say to myself sometimes, even just be stupid, that we are lacking in patience to allow each other to be human and fall on our faces and get up and start over and get the work done. Would you please comment on this necessity for patience and understanding as we try to move to where we want to be?
Sure, thank you for the question and thank you for your work. So I just left Ohio State and moved out to Berkeley, where I'm teaching and starting a new institute. And when I was at Ohio State, I had a staff of about 40 or 50 people, and I would say to my staff sometime, to err, make a mistake is human. To learn from mistakes is intelligence. So I want intelligent humans working at this place. It's okay to make mistakes. And mistakes really are an opportunity to learn. But it's just an opportunity. So you want people to seize that opportunity. But you're exactly right. I mean, the people know, and I'm sure if those of you who read this stuff, the people who make mistakes or have failures almost greater than anyone else are scientists. You know, that's their job, right? You go in the lab and you do something, it doesn't work. You do it, and you notice how it doesn't work. You study how it doesn't work, and then you do it again, it still doesn't work. And you do it again, it still doesn't work. Think about how many times they've tried to find a cure for cancer. But they're not making the same mistake over and over and over again. They're making new mistakes. So that's what we want to encourage, people to be creative. And so sometimes we're so rigid. You make a mistake, you're fired. Get out of here. You know, you're not on my team anymore. You made a mistake. On the other hand, we don't want to be so solicitous as this, yes, honey, I know this mistake. There's that saying where a father is saying to his children, he said, listen up. I'm only going to say this 1,000,000 times. You know, it's like, can we cut it down at least maybe 1,000 times? So we want both. We want to encourage communities and people. And then also what I talked about earlier in terms of situatedness. Some people take longer. People do things in different ways. And having even the diversity of people bring together. There's been a number of studies. Scott Page wrote a book called The Difference. And he showed that with a certain baseline, a diverse group makes much better decisions than a homogeneous group. Because one of the things, we catch each other's mistakes. We have different blind spots. We have different strengths. And your earlier point about this being something, I mean, we are profoundly connected. We are profoundly connected. And the world is getting smaller and smaller. Something happens in Egypt, something happens in Florida. It's all over the world in 5 minutes, if even that long. And you know, you go in your pocket, pull out your phone. It's made in China. It's made in Silicon Valley. The world is small. So the idea that we're living in a discrete, insular neighborhood is just not true. I mean, the air doesn't stop. You know, it doesn't sort of say, okay, this is the Little Rock air, and this is the suburban air. You know, it moves all over the planet. So we need to be thoughtful about how our connections and what our responsibility is to each other. And at the same time, we expect people to learn. Make mistakes, but learn.
Next question. Keith.
It's a really big privilege to have you out. I'm a Clinton School student. My name is Heath Carlock. I wanted you to go back to the slides with the quadrants. You had the despised out group, and you spoke to the despised out group, but there were 3 other quadrants. I wanted you to make some wisdom of the other 3 quadrants and give us a direction to shoot towards.
Well, and this is Susan Fisk's work. She's a professor at Harvard, but now it's been exploded. And actually, we test this. We don't. So again, we actually can test what people are, both consciously and unconsciously. So when you really like somebody a lot and you think they're really smart, that's usually your group. You know, it's like, you know, we're cool. We know how to dance. But we also are cerebral. We can do it all. You know, and who is that we? It doesn't matter. You know, it's me and my group. It's me and my posse. And these are societal evaluations, not individuals. Then there's a group that, you know, we really like them. They're wonderful. They're sweet, but we don't think they're that competent. Women tend to fall in this group. Elderly. You know, it's like, yeah, my dad is a little slow now, so I still love him, but you know. So we tend to pity them. We'll do stuff for them, but we don't want them to run anything. You know, we do stuff for them. We take care of them. And we feel genuine warmth toward them, but we pity them. Then there's groups that, you know, it's like, okay, so you're good at math, you know, and you know, you really are good at being an engineer. I got that. But you don't have any rhythm, you know. And Asians tend to fall in that group. We envy them, but we don't really like them. You know, we respect them. You know, people have, a number of Asian scholars have complained, appropriately I think, that there are very few Asian sex symbols. You know, they're not sexy. They're just smart. They just do math. You know, okay, maybe they can play the violin, but that's it. You know. And actually, it's interesting. I just recently moved to San Francisco. Anyway, there are some sexy Asians, but anyway, I won't. And then, of course, there's the group that I talked about that we think they're not smart, they're stupid, they're lazy, we don't like them, and they're not even human. So those are the 4 quadrants. And we do things by the stories we tell to move people around in those quadrants. And someone noticed about 10 years ago, Latinos who in the past have been, we didn't like them very much, but we at least thought they were competent. You know, they're hard workers. You know, that's what we like about them. They're hard workers. We don't like them as people, but we like the fact they're hard. You know, you want a roof fix, call a Latino. You want a wall built between the United States and Mexico, call the Latinos. You know, they'll get it done. Recently, they started slipping out of the competency state as well as the warmth state. And people predicted when that happened that unless we disrupted that, you're likely going to see draconian laws and policies directed at Asians. Think about 9/11. 9/11 quickly redefined Muslims and Arabs in the United States. They became despised and disliked, and then we had a bunch of draconian policies, profiling, because they cease to be human. The flip side is we can also do things to make people human. And there's actually a story the Dalai Lama tells about a homeless person and who, again, they're showing that the part of the brain that lights up when you see a human being is not lighting up when looking at homeless. And then they ask the person a question. So what vegetables do you think that homeless person likes? And just that question was enough to make the part of the brain associated with human light up. When you had to consider something specific about the person, it changed our evaluation at an unconscious level. So we have to be conscious of the kinds of messages, stories, images that we send about different groups, and try to actually construct a society where we all recognize our humanity.
We have time for one more question. One more.
Dr. Powell, thank you.
You're welcome.
What can be done about the horrendous political divide and the rhetoric that's being used in this country, coded with a lot of racism involved?
That's a very important question. So I mentioned Jeffrey Sachs earlier and Robert Putnam, and they both worry about that from a slightly different perspective. And what they worry is that as society becomes more diverse, it will actually create increased anxiety in society. How that anxiety is used, how it's organized, how it's primed, it's up for grabs. It can go in many different directions. And right now, anxiety is a cousin to fear. And so there's a sense and we can measure it. We can measure, and actually I shared with some folks, I guess yesterday, when I was at the Democratic Convention, I gave a paper there, and I talked about, I issued a warning. And the warning was, if Obama's elected president, there's a good chance, unless we're very careful, we will increase racial and ethnic anxiety in the United States. And people said, are you nuts? We will be in racial heaven. You know, we'll all turn beige. And we'll join hands and sing Kumbaya, you know. I don't know the words to that song, but anyway, obviously that didn't happen. And we didn't pay attention, and what people were doing, they were focusing on that 2% consciousness. They were focusing on, yes, we made tremendous progress in this country. 85% of Americans have fairly positive views around race consciously. But even a higher percentage of Americans have substantial racial anxiety. Now, it's interesting when I talk about racial anxiety. And one reason I don't use the word racist very much, because almost all of us have racial anxiety, and almost all of us have strong values of racial fairness at both the conscious and unconscious level. So which of those will become salient in any given situation depends in part on how we're primed, depends in part on the stories we tell, depends in part on the structures we live. We have the capacity, most of us, have the capacity and even the desire to do something good, but we're not invited. This is actually an amazing thing. I talked about New Orleans a couple of times. I'll say something about New Orleans again. The face of New Orleans, the tragedy of New Orleans, it wasn't just black people, but the face of it was definitely black America. The outpouring of gifts, the outpouring of relief, the outpouring of opening up people's homes was the greatest in American history. More Americans tried to extend their arms to help their black Americans stranded in New Orleans than in World War I, World War II, the Depression. It was an amazing thing. This is a fact that almost no one knows, because it's good news around race. We don't celebrate good news around race. It was whites, blacks, Latinos, and Americans of all stripes reaching across a racial divide and saying, these are fellow Americans, we want to help. The political leaders And 70% of Americans said they were willing to raise taxes to help the folks in New Orleans. That never happened. 70%. Democrats, Republicans, conservative, it didn't happen because the leaders, the pundits, didn't let that story get out. That was not the story told. So part of it is some people can make gains, short-chain gains, out of increased divisiveness. They may really believe it, or they may not believe it. I think for those of us who share the vision that we can continue to build a more perfect union, we have to talk about that. In a more perfect union where there will not be a racial majority. There will not be a religious majority. And at some point, there might even not be a language majority. For some people, that is scary. So Samuel Huntington, a conservative writer out of Harvard, he frets at the idea of the United States not being dominated by, and he says this, Anglo-Saxon Protestants. In fact, he says we shouldn't say we're a country of immigrants. He says we should say we are a settler country. The country was settled by Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and everybody else had to adhere to the rules. This is Samuel Huntington in a book called Who Are We? That's his vision. It's not my vision, and it's not the vision that will play out. But he's whipping up fear within America, and there's some payoff to it. Those of us who have an alternative vision oftentimes are quiet. We've been taught, I think incorrectly, that the way you deal with race is you don't see it. The unconscious sees it. The unconscious is very fast. It organizes around it. The unconscious is just super fast. It just needs help. It needs to be primed to sort of organize and do the right thing. So I think we have to become more skilled at this and start speaking out this individually and collectively and demand our leaders be responsive to this. Thank you.